Hello, Paul.
Hello.
So, we're doing a little podcast for Producer Stack, apparently. So it seems. Today, we're going to talk about loudness, Paul. Let's just start right at the beginning. Let's get the foundations down. What are the loudness wars? What is the race to make everything louder? What is that?
Which one? Loudness Wars 2?
Let's start at Loudness Wars 1.
Okay.
I don't know. So, louder is better, right?
Louder's better. Yeah. Yeah.
And why?
Because it's louder, isn't it?
Yeah.
This starts with the advent of CDs.
Okay.
And first I'll explain why it starts with CDs by talking about vinyl
Okay.
and why you can't make recordings louder on vinyl. It's a really simple thing. The needle vibrates around, and how the amplitude of something is the size of the bump on the vinyl that vibrates the needle. And if that bump is too big, the needle literally jumps out the groove.
I've got you. So the technology is limiting how the difference between the dynamic range is what we're saying, isn't it? The difference between the quietest and the loudest, because you can always turn it up on your amplifier.
You
so
can
the volume
indeed,
will be more, but the difference
Yeah.
between the quietest and the loudest is limited by the technology.
It is indeed. And the intrinsic loudness of a recording means if you've got your volume on max on whatever you're listening to,
Yeah.
the louder recording will be louder. Seems obvious, just to make that clear.
I've got you. So the recording as an intrinsic level, let's say.
It does. It does
as
have an intrinsic
level. And on the same amplifier, one recording will sound louder than the other. Sounds obvious when you say it,
Yeah,
but because one is louder in the recording.
correct.
Got you.
Yeah. And there is a dynamic range part of this as well. So when CDs started to be distributed and people adopted digital at home,
Yeah.
concern of the needle jumping out the record was gone. So you could now make your recordings louder.
Because there is no needle, it's a laser.
Yeah, we don't have to get any more complicated than that
Yeah.
for that. And so digital recordings done inside a computer, there's something called dBFS, which is decibel full scale, which is your digital scale, which is different to the analog domain. I'm not going to get into that. So you could now have more volume in your recordings. Now, how this comes about is the sort of original Loudness Wars 1, which started, I would say, in the 90s. People started recording them louder. And you know what? People seem to like it. That's the main take home from that. They were appreciating louder recordings. I guess it's got something to do with... I liked loud music when I was young, did you?
Yeah, absolutely. My
Yeah.
first experience of this was making TV commercials.
Right.
And the idea was that during Corrie, not that anyone watches TV anymore, but in the break, people go and make a brew. So you had to be able to hear the advert from the kitchen.
Now then, yes. That's another thing. So that, along with the loudness wars, people started getting a bit upset about that. Who was it who got upset? That's the thing.
Was it? Oh, what was she called? What was she called? Mary?
Oh, Mary Whitehouse.
Was it Mary
her?
Whitehouse who kicked off about this? She kicked off about everything in the 90s.
Was it her? Well, I didn't know that. Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't back that up, Paul.
Blame her.
Blame her. Yeah, Mary Whitehouse. It's her fault.
This is post-truth anyway,
Yeah.
so to the internet, we can blame whoever we want. Yeah, let's blame Mary Whitehouse. Mary Whitehouse. No, it did get annoying, though, if you weren't leaving the room
Yeah.
to go make a brew, and the adverts came on, and you were just watching, I don't know.
You buy one, you get one free. I said, you
Yeah.
buy one. You're like, bloody hell.
And allowed the advert.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, you reach for the remote. So there was that. So there's a bit of control that came in that. We'll get into that in a second.
Okay, but what we're talking about is it's not about the loudest point in the song, is it?
No.
It's not about this bit of the song goes up to, I don't know, +4. It's about perceived loudness over time, which is a bit of a difficult concept to get your head around.
We'll get into that. You did make a point before about dynamic range, because in digital, the loudest sound is actually 0, so the scale works backwards down to the quietest sounds.
Yeah.
One way to make a record loud is to reduce the dynamic range between the quietest sounds and the loudest sounds. And this gets into some really spooky areas about psychoacoustics and how humans perceive things. We've got things called the equal loudness contour as well, which is how the human ear responds to different frequencies.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not just about making it loud and reducing that dynamic range. There's a tool called a limiter and a compressor, which kind of does that job for you. We don't need to get too detailed on that, but you will perceive something to be louder over time if that dynamic range is reduced. Now, the challenge is using tools like that tend to bring in distortion.
Yeah.
And so the loudness wars were all about getting these recordings as loud as you can get them without introducing distortion.
Yeah. Does radio play a part in this? Is it about having your track louder than the track that just played before you, so everyone in the car stops and listens?
But that's where the perceived loudness things come in, actually, because radio did control quite tightly the levels. Professional radio.
Yeah,
back in the day, there was lots of radio stations that didn't do it. You know what I mean? But yeah.
So just go into peak versus RMS.
So a peak level is the loudest point in the recording.
Yeah.
RMS is root mean square, which is an average loudness over a time span.
Okay,
Now
so
then.
if you've got a build and a drop, for example, the peak
Yeah.
is probably going to be your drop.
Yeah,
But if you averaged it out over the breakdown, the build and the drop,
yeah.
then it's going to be a very different story.
Yes, it
Yeah.
will be, yeah. So I think the big take home is that people responded to records being louder, so records were produced louder.
Which makes sense. You want people
Yes.
to listen to it or buy it or dance to it.
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, dancing's a very good point as well. So we have got an emergent dance scene on the back of house and stuff like that, which is what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
So imagine a DJ playing records. The less the DJ has to do, the better.
Yeah.
And if the records are all at different levels,
I think James Hype would argue with you there, Paul.
he might. He likes to prance about in front of the decks, but I'm not sure he's turning it up and down all the time.
This is very true. Yeah.
And one thing about DJs is they will just be as loud as possible, so they definitely likes it loud.
Yeah.
Because the dance floor likes it loud. That's the bit that I think people seem to miss all the time about the loudness wars. Remember, we're talking about loudness wars 1 here.
Yeah.
People started to tire of it, and there was a cultural shift, shall we say, into no, dynamic range is better. Like having distinctly quiet sounds and then distinctly loud sounds, making recordings a bit more of a journey from a loudness perspective, which you can appreciate.
Yeah, there is all sorts of things that comes into that, though, isn't there? So if you like the obsession with ASMR,
Yeah.
it's loud whispers.
Yeah.
It's loud, quiet noises.
Yes. We are still in the 90s, early 90s here, so ASMR is a long way
All
off.
right, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay, so Loudness Wars 1 was people trying to get the recordings as loud as possible. Then people kind of said, hang on a minute, dynamic range is also good. Genre plays a lot into this. So dance music, heavy rock, thrash, all of those kind of things, drum and bass,
Yeah.
they should be loud, right?
Yeah, do you think the dynamic range thing is because I remember when digital recording happened,
Yeah.
and everyone's reference, or at least it was in my circle, was like, oh, digital recording's all very well and good, but you still can't record the quietest and loudest notes on a piano forte, to give it its full title. As in, it's still impossible to record the dynamic range that the ear can hear. And if you like, the sign of quality equipment was something that was able to record massive dynamic range without a load of noise. But that felt to me more just like a technical endeavor rather than necessarily a pleasurable thing.
Yeah, the main problem with that is it's absolute nonsense.
Fair enough. Great. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
complete nonsense.
Yeah.
There was lots, and it still goes on today, there's lots of analog purists and all the rest of it. A lot of this comes from, we will get off topic ever so slightly, I'll try and do it as fast as possible. There were digital recordings made with really low bit rates to get the information down phone lines, and
Right.
a lot of that carried over into what people perceived digital recording to be.
Yeah.
Also, early digital recording equipment was prohibitively expensive, massively
Yeah.
expensive. And I think that played into that as well. But at the end of the day, if you're recording, and I'm sorry about how technical this might get, but in 32-bit with high sample rates, the dynamic range is phenomenal. There's a lot of analog purists out there who will hate that, but just you're wrong.
So, back to the club, Paul.
Back to the club, yeah. Certain genres, it deserves to be loud. Classical music, that doesn't need to be loud.
Yeah.
There's a lot in the dynamic range there, and that is a big part of it. Singer-songwriter ballads, they don't need to be loud. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Loud is appropriate at a certain point is basically.
Yeah, there's also something at a gig as well. As soon as you can hear the the person next to you singing over the PA, it becomes bad.
Yeah, correct.
You don't want to hear the person next to you. You just kind of want to hear a little bit of a throng that there's an audience there, but God, you don't want to hear them joining in.
No, you don't.
No.
You don't. You want your chest to be rattling and all that, don't you? That's what you want.
Leaning against those bass bins. Oh,
yeah.
Those were the days. Yeah.
All right, so we're getting on to... Let's skip ahead in time and go to streaming media.
Yes, Spotify to everybody, generally.
Yeah, and YouTube plays a part in this as well.
Yeah.
Now, what was happening is the streaming platforms, for the convenience of their listeners, much in the same way as TV, were combating the loudness of the adverts, which we should talk about briefly.
Yeah, I can jump in there.
Yeah.
So, in Teleworld, there's a really strict adherence to how loud things can be. And basically, if you don't adhere to this particular setting, this particular loudness, they won't show your advert on telly. Yeah. And they won't put your TV program on telly.
Let's just say there was, and there were these specs, right? So let's just say this is how loud your advert can be. And let's just call it -6 dBFS, digital full scale. You could use the tricks we talked about earlier, the limiting and the compression, to reduce that dynamic range to make that -6 still quite loud. So there was a problem. The way loudness was measured. So something new was introduced. In fact, there were a couple of things around at the time which did a similar thing, and this is called program loudness, which measures the average loudness over time. The reason it's called program was because it was measured over the entire program. And the streaming platforms, YouTube, Spotify, they adopted the LUFS measurement. I think Apple decided it. I'm not sure. They said it's -14. So you're making dance music, right, which needs to be loud, and all of a sudden you've got to hit -14, which is not loud enough for the dance floor. The DJ is not loud enough. It's the same for like heavy rock stuff and all that anyway, all that thrash metal and all. Oh, I do want to say though, I do remember, I think it was Pantera years ago and made a big thing of doing a super loud version of one of their singles. It might have been Walk or something like that. I think they'd pushed it over 0 and anyway, there's a thing just to get you to buy it, how loud it is. I love it. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. So the -14, and we're getting into Loudness Wars 2 here. So for, I would say, getting on for a decade, there was a lot of music being produced in these genres where all of a sudden you weren't using your typical peak measuring of the loudness. You all of a sudden were doing program loudness with LUFS. So different than RMS, LUFS is for the length of your song. So that could be 20 minutes or 2 minutes. You have to hit -14. And it was actually a little bit of a misunderstanding because that was what Spotify were doing to the recordings on playback. So people decided that to get the best quality, you should be mixing your tracks to that. But problem now for the people who are doing records for DJs, for instance, are they doing 2 now? 2 mixes? A loud one for the DJs, one for your streaming platforms. This is Loudness Wars 2 now. So some triumphant that Loudness Wars were over and -14 is the thing. But somebody somewhere, I don't know who, where or when, one of the dance labels, I think they just decided, no, forget all that. We're not doing 2 mixes. Just do it loud for the DJs and upload them.
So basically people said, screw this, we're going to have it as loud as possible.
Yeah.
But that was mainly for the clubs, because then if people are listening to it through Spotify or SoundCloud or something like that, it's going to be normalized.
So what you're left trying to do is now get your tracks loud. And if we're talking about bass-heavy music, particularly club-type music,
Yeah.
EDM, house, tech house, those kind of things, you have trade-offs.
Yeah.
It's difficult to get bass loud because it hits those limiters and those tools we were talking about earlier really hard, and it's easy to bring in distortion.
Okay.
So there's a vast array of tools and techniques to try and get that loud. It's a process that you're doing from the ground up when you start your music.
Yeah, the weird thing is, though, when you listen to dance music, or at least when I do, is the bass always feels really loud.
It's not that easy to do. People struggle with it. Yeah, it is a trade-off and it's a balance. That's the main mission, to have that bass.
So do you think this has
be
been
loud.
Do you think this has been a conditioning now? Because weirdly, you've mixed everything to, let's say, -5 or -6. Yeah, so super loud. And then people are listening to it on Spotify at -14.
Yeah.
Is that just like your same mix but just a bit quieter? This is what
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it doesn't do it. It's not. It won't do anything actively to the track to balance it out. If that's what you're getting at,
Yeah.
it won't change the mix in any way. It'll just analyze it and reduce it so that it hits -14.
So I suppose the actual question is, does louder equal more sales, streams, listens?
I think the answer to that is blindingly obviously yes.
Right. So that means that loudness is always going to win because,
Within a genre,
yeah.
let's just put it like that. Like I said, with classical music, no, you're not gonna. You want that tiny little flute, whatever it's doing in the background.
So can you explain the difference between compression
Yeah,
and having it? So my brain goes to, I want everything loud.
yeah,
I'll just compress it. So
Yeah.
everything's at -6.
the fatigue sets in. To put it basically, what you will introduce doing that is loads of distortion.
Okay. Yeah. Which you're saying is a bad thing?
It's another conversation. I'm
Yeah.
not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but that's the perceived knowledge at the moment. That's the general acceptance. Distortion bad. If you want me to point you to loads of huge records that are distorted like that, I can.
Yeah.
There've been loads of them. And we do get into a conversation here about what is correct.
Yeah.
Loads of genres just wouldn't exist if people were doing what was correct.
You see, that gets my back right up, that what
Why?
is correct. What
Yeah.
does that even mean?
Yeah, it's
What
just
is-
gatekeepers in it.
Yeah.
You know.
Because what is correct, I would say, is what people like.
Yes. Yeah,
That's
but
what
there's
is-
gatekeepers in the way, Martin, who do stop people. It was the Kinks, right? They kicked holes in the speakers to get a sound out of them.
Is that true? I
That's
did
true,
not know
yeah.
that. I
Yeah,
did
they're,
not know
they're
that.
partly responsible for a distorted guitar sound.
I love that. That's
Yeah,
ace.
it wasn't the music wasn't angry enough for them. I can't remember the full story. This could be complete nonsense how it originated, but there was they got a hole either in transit or something,
Yeah.
and just liked it, so they did it to everything else.
Amazing. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Stuff that happens by accident.
Think about punk, drum and bass, for instance, all of those sorts of things. We can go into dub, reggae, even
Yeah.
reggae, and all the way that was done. But loads of rule breaking all over the.
So, considering the first point that a lot of people come into contact with new music now is via a 60-second short or maybe a 10-second TikTok, how does that tie in? Are people mixing their TikToks loud? Or is
Yeah.
that not even something people are thinking about?
I think they're doing them DJ loud. If we're staying in, just take it as read, we're staying in dance music here.
Yeah.
They are mixing them DJ loud, and letting the platforms do what they do.
Which then does lend yourself to the argument then. If it doesn't, no, I suppose, mix it for people in clubs,
Yeah.
mix it for that experience,
Yeah.
and then the streaming platforms, the advertisers, the social media platforms will just do their thing with it. It's not going to degrade your track.
Yeah.
It's going to be your mix, but quieter.
Yeah.
So weirdly, if you have mixed louder and you have started to introduce all those distortions,
Yeah,
they'll still exist in the quieter version, won't they?
they will indeed. Yeah.
So there's the argument for louder is better.
Yeah.
There you go. It's dead simple.
Yeah, it's that simple.
Louder.
Wouldn't you bother with all that. Louder is better.
I know. So
yeah.
just listen to that bit. Loudness wars, louder's better. Over.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And that is the take on there is it's the listeners who decide. If they listen to the louder ones more, I know a correlation isn't necessarily evident, but
Yeah.
in this case, I reckon it is.
People don't like to think of music as a business, do they? But ultimately, you've got to get streams, make sales, have people come to your gigs.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of things going into that experience.
Yeah, if you want a career out of it, yeah, absolutely.
But I'd say in dance music, as well as the light show, it's about what you're hearing.
Yeah.
As much as James Hype will have you believe differently. Oh, dear me. I'm obsessed with him. I am absolutely obsessed with him.
You spend a lot of time. You told me you don't like him.
I hate
you spend
him.
so much time talking about
I know.
What were you doing last night, Martin? Sorry, say again.
So last night, this is so niche. Last night I was pretending to be James Hype and imagining that I had a fifth deck,
Yeah.
which was a sampler which I could do a snare drum riser on. So I used my little Ableton Move to do that. And James Hype has this little thing where he runs his hand across a load of buttons, which creates like a snare drum riser.
Yeah.
And I did that, and it felt cool.
Can I just ask, were you early James Hype in dirty clubs, or was this Tomorrowland or something like that you were fantasizing about?
In my mind, I don't really need to answer that, Paul.
It was Tomorrowland. It was epic.
It was. All right, let's just say no. I don't know. It's a good question. That I don't know. It was the Roadhouse, Paul. It was the Roadhouse. It was the Roadhouse.
Credible James Hype.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything else to discuss in here, but I'm just thinking about electronic music and that live experience.
Yeah.
Versus acoustic music. And there is a thing here, because I used to mix bands in little venues like the Roadhouse. Mix bands badly in the Roadhouse.
Yeah.
Little sweaty clubs. But obviously you've got an acoustic drum kit. You've got people turning up with various sizes of guitar
We're
amps.
talking about the kind of clubs there where you don't need to mic the drum kit, right?
Yeah, exactly. And your PA ends up just being a vocal PA with a tiny bit of tickle of other stuff coming through it.
Yeah.
And then obviously if you're in an arena, that all goes, doesn't really matter. But I'm thinking if you've got a purely electronic sound, then everything's about the PA.
Yeah,
everything's about the mix. There is no other noises.
No.
So in review, Paul,
Yes.
Loudness has become a thing because originally on vinyl, which is the way most people consume music, or via the radio, which were playing vinyl, the amount of loudness you could have in a track was limited by the physicality of the vinyl itself.
Correct.
It was just a limitation of the technology.
Yes.
We'll bypass cassettes for a second, jump straight to CDs. Needle jumping doesn't become a thing.
Yeah.
So suddenly you can have everything louder and not worry about like the laser jumping out of the groove.
Yeah.
This is massive simplification. But so then louder is better, and parallel that with what was going on in broadcast and people making brews during curry is that people had to be able to hear it from the kitchen, so you wanted your ad louder than anyone else's. But basically this started to piss people off. Yeah. You'd gone from a really quiet episodes of curry to really loud, you buy one, you get one free.
Yeah.
Then streaming platforms came in, and at the same time, broadcast were trying to limit this shouty advert thing. So they brought in like a new standard, which wasn't about peak or anything like that. It was about loudness over time. So you could still have loud bits, but you had to balance that out with quiet bits.
Yeah.
So then, because of Apple, because they dominated music streaming to start off with anyway, they just decided on a standard which is minus 14 LUFS. And basically everyone started to think we should really mix to minus 14 because that's what Apple, Spotify are doing.
I'm 95% confident it was minus 14. It might be another number. But
I thought it was minus 16 to start with, and then they changed it to minus 14. But
yeah, it might have been. There was a few numbers floated around, and I think that was, we didn't talk about it actually, but just very briefly, I think the different platforms adopted different standards, and then more or less it's settled down now into
minus
whatever
14.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but then the music industry basically go, we're about selling music and getting people enjoying gigs, and DJs want loud stuff. So you know what? Actually, screw them. We're going to get it as loud as we can without ruining the track,
Yeah.
basically, or without causing too much fatigue or making it difficult to listen to.
Yeah.
And then the simple equation is louder is better. Brilliant.
Yeah.
There you go.
Loudness done.
Loudness done. And I suppose the whole point of doing this is there's a load of tools out there that people use to try and get their tracks louder, and a load of tricks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is the constant battle on your mix.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Anything else to say, Paul?
Nope.
I'm going to hit stop.